Good afternoon. We have had a long day today, and I want to encourage everybody to hang with us for one more session because I know we've got some folks who you will want to hear from. Dansby just popped on the screen. Hi, Derek. Thank you for joining us. This is really an interesting panel. I'm really thrilled because I have to tell you, I have the formal bios of every one of these folks, but they are all people I have had the great pleasure to work with in my career, Derek included. His bio says that one of his first real estate jobs was he was the community development committee chair for in Over the Rhine when we were doing the Over the Rhine plan many, many moons ago. Derek has come a long way since then. Not sure I have. Derek is now the president-elect of Realtors, which is a really important partner in today's conversation. This is the organization of Black Realtors in Southwest Ohio. Derek is also the current chair of the charter committee and has had a long career in real estate and is buying and selling and doing all kinds of projects right now. So he's a perfect person to have on a panel. We're also going to be joined, I hope, by Jim Cunningham. There he is. Jim Cunningham, you heard earlier today, he is our keynote speaker, the Midwest director of our HUD office. And I've got some questions I wanted to ask Jim at lunchtime, which I'm going to try to do as well. We'll also be joined by Hamilton County Commissioner Denise Driehaus. I know that County Commission is actually just over or just about to be over. So she's jumping from a county commission meeting to our session. We're also, again, going to be joined by Brandon Black, who's going to be drawing what he's hearing from us. So welcome, Brandon, and thanks for being here. So maybe we can start, and I know we're waiting for Commissioner Driehaus, but I also know our time is growing short. So, Derek, why don't I ask you to spend 5 or 10 minutes talking about what Realtors are doing lately and what kinds of suggestions you have to move the needle on Black homeownership in Cincinnati.
Well, Liz, thank you so much. It does seem like many moons ago that we were at the corner of 12th and Race, putting together the Over the Rhine Planning Steering Committee plan for Over the Rhine. And it's just amazing to see how far Over the Rhine has come, but as well as our city of Cincinnati. Just to give you a little bit of background, the Greater Cincinnati Realtors Association is one chapter of NARAB. Which stands for the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. NARAB was formed in 1947 as a result of the National Association of Realtors not allowing African-American agents to be allowed to show houses in predominantly white neighborhoods. We created our own brokerage called NARAB, the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, and now we have 88 chapters all over the country. Here locally, we're the Greater Cincinnati Realtors Association. One of the big things that we have at the Realtors is we want to be very deliberate about increasing the number of African-American homeowners in the city of Cincinnati. You know, our city has nearly 42 to 45% African-American population, but yet our number of homeowners is very drastically lower than the local average as well as the national average. And that's something that we as Realtors are very, very focused on. Which is why I'm happy to be here today, be a part of this conference, Race, Wealth, and Homeownership. So I just want to as I've picked up on some things and I've been listening throughout the day, I've kind of written down a few notes of some things I think are important for us moving forward. First of all, I know I mentioned it just a second ago, but as we move forward, we need to be very deliberate about making sure that we are we are doing all of our best efforts to increase homeownership amongst African-American individuals and families. Homeownership is the easiest way to increase wealth amongst families. But yet we have had a difficult time doing that for a number of different reasons. And I think now is the time for us to make sure that we make this a priority moving forward. And in order to do that, we've got to, first of all, make sure that we've got career pathways for African Americans, as well as we've got to make career paths for African Americans. I'm not just talking about jobs. I'm talking about careers that African American individuals can support their families for the next 10 to 15 years. In addition to that, we need to support small Black-owned businesses. Like what you're doing today, supporting these small Black businesses, I think is outstanding. We need to continue to do that. If you're having an event, a meeting, make sure you try to include a small Black business involved with, whether it be catering, whether it be event planning, whether it be technical assistance, whether it be something on the back house, managing the website or anything like that. We need to support small Black businesses, and we need to make sure we have career opportunities so that individual African Americans can build wealth, can actually buy a house. So one of the first things after getting that career path going down the road, and I know that this is something that Laura Benner from the National Fair Housing Alliance discussed, was our lending in the city of Cincinnati as it relates to mortgages is historically low. You know, I mentioned that African Americans make up 42% of the population in the city of Cincinnati, but only 11% of the individuals that apply for a mortgage, new mortgages, were received by African Americans in the city of Cincinnati. That's not something we should be proud about. That's something that we should continue to monitor. That's something we should continue to take a look at. And that's something that we have to do a better job at. I think Royce brought up some good comments around, you know, look at how we're marketing, look at how the awareness is around how we, you know, actually market and target our mortgage lending products to the general public. Those products don't look like me. They don't gravitate towards me. We've got a lot of myths around mortgage products, and Ms. Speed mentioned, some people think you have to put 20% down to buy a house. That's just simply not true. So not only do we need to increase our awareness, but we need to make sure that we're marketing mortgage products to African American families and individuals. Another big issue that we're working on is we're going to have to find a way to provide subsidies to decrease the purchase price to make these houses affordable for African American families. Right now, we are in the midst of a huge housing shortage. There's not enough product for me to show buyers in an affordable rate. It's so hard to renovate houses. We have so many unknowns. So in order to make sure that we can make a house affordable and still make sure the house has been renovated in tip-top condition, we're going to have to find a way to bring that price down to a level that makes it affordable for families. The last thing we want to do is see families purchase homes, get in homes that they can't afford or that need an incredible amount of maintenance. And then we end up right back in the situation where they end up in foreclosure. And that's not the situation that we want to have. The Port Authority and Deborah Robb, she mentioned some actual projects that they're working on. I think they're outstanding. The Greater Cincinnati Realtors is supportive of what they're trying to do. And we think that they should do what they're doing threefold. We've got a lot of work. The last comment that I'll make is really more focused on infill development. I talked briefly about how expensive it is to renovate our existing housing stock. We have an old housing stock as an old Midwestern town. Some houses are 100+ years old. And it's hard to exactly determine what your renovation budget is because you're going to run into so many unknowns during that project. So what we need to do is to try to create and expand infill construction and affordable housing. We need to find vacant land, or we need to create vacant land by demolishing houses that are just not able to be renovated just because of the extreme amount of cost it's going to take. And we need to create a new home ownership model based on new construction. And that's going to take all of us working together with the court, with the county, with the city, as well as our corporate community to buy into all of this. So I'm just excited to be here. It's a wonderful panel. And I just want to thank Xavier, CDI, CDF, and all of the other partners who have put this conference together. I miss you all so much. I wish we were in person. Thank you for the opportunity.
Boy, I do too. So I'm going to do a quick sound check because we're having all kinds of technical issues. Denise, will you say hey for us?
Hey, Liz.
All right. We've got Commissioner Dreehouse in the house. Jim, can you hear us? And can you say hey real quick?
Can you hear me?
We can. All right.
It's hard for me to hear you, but that's okay. We'll get through it.
All right, we're going to muddle through this all, gang. Thank you, Brandon. I know it's been a little glitchy, but this is an important conversation. So, Commissioner Dreehouse, I know you just literally got out of a commission meeting, and I'm sorry you haven't had a chance to catch your breath, but I wanted to see if I couldn't start with you and ask, the Hamilton County Commission has made a huge commitment to affordable housing and to housing and community development as part of the CARES Act recovery and the Arpa funds. Can you talk a little bit about that commitment and maybe what brought the commissioners to that and how it's being received in the larger community? Because it truly is a historic moment here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We haven't done much as a county commission in the housing space in the past. Part of that was related to our budget and the lack of resources to really have a meaningful impact from my vantage point. But the federal dollars that we got through CARES and ARPA have made a tremendous difference in how we view ourselves as community partners. And so we've got a real opportunity right now to do something in a space that we know is critically important to the community. Every time we turn around, we're talking about the need for housing. And so we wanted to make a commitment to that. And so all three commissioners voted for the current plan. Let me say that there are some short-term strategies and long-term strategies. So some of the short-term strategies involve some federal dollars, but they're CDBG dollars or they're home dollars. And so we recently had a pot of money. It was just over $1 million. We were the last dollars in for some housing projects throughout the county. They were in Price Hill, Walnut Hills, Laughlin, Evanston, Pendleton. So they were all over the place. And, it was over 300 units that we helped to finish out so that those could get going. But that truly is a drop in the bucket compared to what we think we can do with the ARPA dollars. So we have set aside $40 million through the 158 we got from the federal government. 35 of that is kind of a long-term pot. 5 million is for much more short-term relief related to rental assistance, mortgage assistance. We're trying to keep people in their homes. And so we've never done mortgage assistance before. And so we're pretty excited to roll that out. It's coming soon within the next couple of weeks. We'll run it through JFS and hopefully make sure that people who are in trouble right now financially because of COVID can stay in their homes. So 5 million towards that, which leaves us 35. Some of the 35 will be spent related to the homeless need that we have in this community. And again, trying to house people that are unhoused. But then a large portion of it is going to be part of a conversation in partnership with many, many organizations throughout the county to say, how do we become a partner in housing? Is it investing in with the city in CDF? Is it going to these communities and reaching out and saying, what are the needs here? What are the needs there? So I'm going to give you a very quick overview of some of the folks that are at that table, because I think what we as county commissioners know is we're not the experts when it comes to how do you do housing. Well, I don't know how to do housing. So let's get all the experts at the table. So we've got sessions that are taking place. They're organized by Ernst & Young. And let me read off some of the smart people at the table. CDF, the Realtors and the Realtists are at the table. The Chamber, CMHA, Community Building Institute, of course, First Ring Suburbs. We've got LISC. We've got organizations that represent people with disabilities. Model Group is there. Our Office of Reentry is there for folks that are reentering from the Justice Center. Planning and Development, Strategies, the Port, Lincoln Heights. We've got a church out there that's involved. Community Learning Institute in Lower Price Hills involved. So as you can tell, we've got folks from all different aspects of the housing equation sitting at the table, hopefully providing recommendations to us as to how to best invest these dollars long term to have some kind of transformational movement when it comes to workforce housing, affordable housing, housing for people with disabilities in this community. So that's the effort that's underway right now. I will tell you from my vantage point, this is a once in a career opportunity, because this kind of money doesn't generally come into a government organization. And so we really want to be strategic with these investments and use all the smart ideas that come from this group to inform how we do this.
Thank you so much. And I have to say, really appreciate the county's commitment on this topic. Jim, can you hear us? Yes? Perfect. So Jim Cunningham, I hope folks on this session had an opportunity to hear Jim at lunchtime. It is absolutely undeniable how important HUD's contribution and HUD's position in this space is. You outlined a significant number of programs and efforts around equity, around inclusion, around mortgage lending. Can you talk a little bit? And it also occurs to me that your role has been as somebody in a federal agency who's giving out dollars to jurisdictions and programs and developers. What do you wish people would bring to you? Are there programs or projects that you don't see that you wish you would? Things that you'd like to say to all of us partners who are listening now and going to be ready for the influx of HUD spending? What should we be doing? What are the things you would like to see from us?
Well, more housing, short answer. But I think realistically, I talked a little bit about the affirmatively furthering fair housing. And I think what we're looking at is two sides of the coin. It's investing in opportunity areas with amenities, but it's also investing in communities, underserved communities, so that we can bring them back. Because we're never going to get to the housing supply if we don't address both sides of that coin, right? So I think we're looking at doing development in underserved areas, but also doing development in opportunity areas. I mentioned earlier today the new project-based rental assistance. I think a lot of that is tied to new development in opportunity areas to subsidize those developments in areas that have access to good schools and things of that nature, and transportation and services and amenities. So I think we're going to look at that. I heard Derry talk about the subsidies on single family, and one of the things as I was preparing, I started thinking about all the home ownership programs HUD used to have, and many of them are gone. And there was an interesting podcast in the Washington Post just last week about a group in Lawndale in Chicago that is trying to build affordable home ownership and how difficult it is to subsidize that, right? So we don't have the low-income housing tax credit is mostly a rental program. There have been some innovative uses of that where they build it as single-family housing, and then after the 15 years they convert it to home ownership. So I think that's a good model. But in the Build Back Better, we had the new tax credit to actually develop affordable housing. So I think coming up with programs. I mean, we used to have the 312 loan program. The city of Cincinnati used to have an awesome urban homesteading program where they used HUD. So all the American Dream Down Payment Initiative, the Nehemiah program, the Hope for Home Ownership, all that stuff has kind of gone by the wayside. I think we got scared and I saw someone ask a question about, the 2008 market. I think we have to go back to do responsible home ownership. What happened in the early 2000s was not responsible home ownership. So as we develop programs, I think we do need to have home ownership production programs. And I also think we need to be smartly subsidized to make sure that the people that we're getting into home ownership it's responsible, and also they are successful in that home ownership. So those are some of the things that I think as we go forward that, we clearly, if we get any part of the Build Back Better initiative, we need to start building units. We need to do it quickly. I'm going to address one of the comments because I've seen it twice now. What happens if we don't get the Build Back Better agenda passed? I don't like to opine on what Congress is going to do. It's probably not going to get fully funded, but I think we're going to get something. HUD has to be funded, and hopefully Congress will do their job and we will get some funding. And I think what we're going to see, even if we don't get all of Build Back Better, we're going to see significant increases in some of our programs. We may see some new programs. And as Commissioner Driehaus said, this is historic. I mentioned, we got $10 billion in 2 programs out of ARP. It's almost a sixth of the HUD budget in 2 programs. So I think we're going to see some historic funding. And the other thing I will say that Commissioner Reese talked about, our secretary. She's a fighter and she knows Congress, and everything that she's, particularly to the internal HUD staff, is that HUD needs to get back in the game and produce housing. And I think we're gonna, if we don't get in Build Back Better, she's gonna keep fighting. So I think we're gonna see some of this, whatever comes out of Build Back Better, some of it's gonna get funded, and people like our grantees of Hamilton County and City of Cincinnati and Greg at CMHA are gonna have to be ready to spend it.
So that I've heard, Jim, you said that twice now, and I want all of us, because the room you're talking to is the people who need to get ready, I think, in large measure. And so, I hope that we are all hearing that. I want to go back to Commissioner Reese and Jim. You both talked about this a little bit. And Derek, I think you're at the upstream end. So how does HUD, how does the county think about this balance between safety net and emergency services, and making sure that folks who are unhoused get housed, and going upstream and being prepared to support home ownership and homeowner products and community development, sort of the more upstream part of the equation, if you will? How do you balance those things? Because they're both critical. Anybody? I mean, there's a role, HUD plays a role, the county plays a role, the city plays a role in that whole sort of, when we talk about continuum care here in Cincinnati around housing, we're usually talking about homeowners, homelessness. But it really is everything from being housed when you're on the street to being in a house you own that is providing for your family. How do we pick the places along that spectrum where we're going to engage and invest?
Well, I can start. I mean, I think, our big emphasis, I started out today when we were talking about our programs, I started on the homeless spectrum, because I think, first of all, I think we really need to put an effort into housing those most vulnerable on the lower end of the spectrum. And that's where I think both Congress and our HUD secretary is putting a lot of emphasis on that end. But I also, I know that many of you in Cincinnati, we've lost a lot of affordable housing. We've lost a lot of project-based rental assistance. So I think we also need to be mindful of just preserving what we have, the subsidies we have. But as you go along, as people are successful, when we get them off the street, right, it's called a continuum for a purpose. And we need to keep making sure we're stably housing those. And as people get stably housed, then they can start to build wealth and start to build income and move up that ladder. So I think, you do need to be strategic. And I've preached, and you're a planner, Liz, is, we need to have comprehensive community development. That's one of the reasons, when I first started at HUD, we developed a consolidated plan to actually have communities think about things holistically. So I think we need to go, and it's turned into what we didn't want it to be. And it's just that it's an application tool. It really should be a planning tool for communities to think about all of those entry points and housing points along the continuum. So I just think that we need to be smarter. And I also think I mentioned AFFH. I think we need to have that fair housing lens as we do planning for housing, because all of it is tied into equity, the barriers that exist, particularly for underserved, low-income minority communities. So I think all that planning really needs to take place.
So, and I had too much background noise, so I couldn't comment earlier. So the money that we're spending through the American Rescue Plan, the buckets that I referred to really, to me, are the continuum. As far as, the mortgage relief, trying to keep people in their home, the relief that we're doing for the homeless population, and then the much larger bucket related to housing, and having some of the community partners that are not just the same partners. Some of these folks deal in much smaller scale because they do different kinds of housing, or they have different relationships in the community. And so I think, I'm waiting to find out what all these partners are going to say, because they are all part of the continuum. When we got reentry in the room, sitting next to the model group, sitting next to CDF, sitting next to somebody out of Lincoln Heights, sitting next to the Community Building Institute, right? I mean, that is the continuum. And so I'm hopeful that this group will come up with some creative strategies, again, to inform what we do. It'll be ongoing, but the money that we have right now is the catalyst for how the county starts to move around in the space. And, I am intentionally including people with disabilities because I think there's a real need there in this community. You've seen really creative things with LAD and some of the organizations that are doing these smart homes. We need to think about that and think about how we are moving in that space for that, especially that population. We need to think about communities where the rents are, so high, or rather there's such a high percentage of rental as opposed to homeownership. What does that mean? What does that look like? And what are the barriers? And so some of these groups, the Realtors and the Realtists, help us better understand those barriers. I'm super optimistic about the outcome of the process that we're involved right now, but I can't tell you what the result is because we're just not there yet.
Right. No, as am I. So Derek, you talked about the front end of the system in a different sort of way, which is to say we've got to build career paths and jobs, and that's about career paths and wage increases. Talk a little bit about that, because I mean, the other thing that we've heard today, boy, is housing is both focused on production of units and terribly comprehensive in that it's also about wages, and it's about education, and it's about the social determinants of health, and understanding how to knit those things together is, I think, part of what we struggle with in this region. So Derek, I'm sorry, that was a way longer question than I thought. Talk a little bit about what career paths and wages have to do with this equation, particularly for Black homeowners.
Well, when you go to actually apply for a mortgage with your mortgage lender at your bank, they're going to want to know, how long, where do you work at, and how long have you been there? Stable employment is a very key indicator for getting approved for a mortgage. As we continue to grow our city and our county, Commissioner Drewhouse, we are going to have to be able to provide career opportunities for African American individuals and families. And once we begin that part of the continuum should include making sure that they're aware that home ownership is real. Home ownership is something that's achievable. It's not just this, pie in the sky ideal that only a certain number of people can get to. And as we look at the continuum, home ownership should continue to be marketed. We should make it aware that people know that home ownership is a real opportunity. It's something that's achievable. It's something that in many times can be more affordable than renting. And not only is it affordable, it provides you with a stable location, stable house for you to raise your kids, going to the same school, which then allows a new generation to then continue to grow up in a safe neighborhood that's clean, that provides them with new wealth that now they can pass on to their children, that will then continue to help build that wealth that we're talking about that's so important.
I have to share, I come from the place-based world myself, right? Thank you, LISC. Thank you, United Way, for all of the invested in place matters over the years. Building community is, the house you buy is exactly the roof and the four walls, but it's so much more than that. It's about your neighbors and the schools that you then have access to, and the transportation that you then have access to. Then we're right back to this very comprehensive notion of what housing is all about, because I think it means what's community all about. So I have been puzzling over this question and all day long, and it's a hard question, and you guys are the smart people in the room, so I'm going to pose it here. The other kind of tension in this conversation is, do we need to change hearts and minds of all the fellow residents of Hamilton County who are not in this session today? And do we do that with good projects that demonstrate success? And or do we do that by enforcing regulations around fair housing? Because the problems that we're describing are decades and decades and decades old, and hearts and minds don't seem to be moving much. In some ways, this feels like a really central part of the conversation, and it is something that we dance around a lot. So, ladies and gentlemen, how do you apply a regulatory structure that forces the question at the same time when we're providing good, solid, wonderful examples of how mixed income, mixed race communities can be successful, happy, wholesome places to live? That's what's in my mind.
I think we have examples out there already. I know that there's tons of CDCs around the city that have been doing this for decades. You know, when I was working at Price Hill Will, we were doing this at that point in time, some 7-8 years ago. We were doing it because we wanted to ensure that the housing market was stabilized, that homeowners weren't losing equity in their housing. Now, in just a flip of a switch, it's now the opposite. Now our homeowners have tons of equity, and now we can't find enough product that's affordable for those that are looking to buy at an affordable rate. So I think that the examples that these CDCs have been doing for decades now that are out there, the Winds, the Madisonvilles, the downtown has grown dramatically. So we need to really not just look for examples, but just expand what we've been doing, and let's put more investment into it. Let's build more product, and let's find a way to build on vacant lots so we can continue to triple what we've already been doing in the past.
Yeah, can I just piggyback on that and say that I think we need to listen to the communities because they know what works in their communities. And they all have different histories related to housing and accessibility to housing. And we need to know that. We need to respect it and pay attention to it. And Derek, you're right. There's tons of CDCs that have had a great deal of success because they're in the community and they're listening to the people that will become the homeowners. And for those communities, and I've asked this question very recently because I think countywide, right, the city is very well positioned because of the CDCs there, but what about the communities in the county? What about the Mount Healthy and Silverton and Forest Park and all these other places? And we've got something, it's called a CIC, which can function and provide tools and some of the backbone, like a CDC, to some of these jurisdictions that don't have them. And so I think as a county, we need to think through how do we make sure that these jurisdictions are, first of all, aware that we've got the CIC that can be supportive of their efforts, and then back that up with some of these dollars that we're talking about, because each community has distinct needs and distinct strategies. And I don't think a cookie cutter approach is helpful. I think we really need to get in there and do the work.
And I think one of the things I always think not going the regulatory way is the best way. So I think you can't, in my experience, you need developers, development groups, that, as the commissioner said, are local, that know the community. I think that helps. But you have to do the legwork, right? Do the planning, talk to the community. The times that I see that affordable housing development of any time fails, it's when it's the 11th hour and all of a sudden everyone's crazy. But I think they also have to know that HUD is out there, and we will enforce the Fair Housing Act if people are doing exclusionary zoning, or if they're not in my backyard. I think of an example. I think to buy time in Cincinnati. I mean, we actually had a case where we aren't building housing in a certain place, and we used the Fair Housing Act, and we got housing built in that community. So knowing that's out there, I think it's helpful. we will enforce the Fair Housing Act, but that's not the way that we really want to operate. We really want to operate as partners and doing that. So I really just think you need to go in and do the planning and have the conversations with communities ahead of time, so they know what's going on. And I think that's a better recipe for success than going the regulatory route, but know that it's there.
I appreciate that. Derek, do you want to speak to that? You and I have been partners in planning processes before from all kind of way back.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think we need to make sure we reach out and talk to the community council, but I think we also need to go around and knock on some doors as well. We have some great leaders in our community councils, but they don't necessarily always speak for all of our neighbors. So we need to make sure that it's a comprehensive engagement with communities, that we're reaching just beyond going to the community councils, but we're knocking on doors and we're talking to small business owners and folks who may not go to the community councils as well. I also believe that if we put forth a product that looks good, that's quality, that example will ring so loud that every neighborhood is going to want to have that in their community as well. But we've got to just, more than anything, we've got to start digging and we've got to start building.
I appreciate that. I have been engaged in so many planning efforts over the last many years. And back to this historic moment, it can be very frustrating to put a planning process together only to find then that there are resources for the market rate side of the equation, but not for the affordable side of the equation. And I think this is a moment where those resources are available. And if we can be flexible and nimble in the way that we deploy them with community, listening to what they want, that feels like a really important recipe for success and as a way to get product in the ground. I mean, Commissioner Driehaus has heard me talk about this probably ad nauseum now, but we've been working in communities in Hamilton County on housing plans in the last year, and they're producing all kinds of really wonderful project locations, really important ways to integrate new kinds of housing product, more affordable kinds of housing product into communities all over Hamilton County. And that makes me really enthusiastic. Any of the development community that wants to talk about it, I can give you 5 projects right now today. Communities need some support and they need some help to get them off the ground. But I think we could be developing housing in places that people want to live soon. If we listen to the communities and try and support the kinds of objectives that they're putting forward, which is not phrased in the frame of a question. I apologize.
Well, but Liz, isn't that the role of government sometimes, is to be the catalyst, to put that, the first dollars in or the last dollars in, to be in partnership with the communities, because, these are taxpayer dollars. And so they're investments. And I think sometimes the end game's a little different for a private developer than it is for a government entity trying to accomplish a goal, with an equity lens. And so I think that's exactly the opportunity that we have right now, is to do things differently, because we have an opportunity to put some catalytic dollars into projects that are in partnership with the community. That's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah. And the other thing that I would say, I feel like Southwest Ohio, we are not facing the kinds of market headwinds that they are on the coasts. And I feel like we could get this right. I really honestly believe, with all the people in the room and the resources that are on the table and the dedication that I see, we really could get this right here. And I don't mean to sound Pollyannish, because I know there has been real harm done in this community over the past 50 years. But you just have to keep going. Tomorrow we have to do it better.
Yeah, but Liz, we've got to start now. We can't wait any longer. When I first became a full-time real estate agent in 2015, you could go find a vacant house for $25,000, $35,000 easily. Now in 2021, you can barely find a vacant house, and if you do, it's $75,000 to $95,000. And that's just not at a rate that's going to make an affordable housing model work. It's just not going to happen. So we've got to make this approach a holistic approach. It's going to take the county, it's going to take the city, but it's also going to take our corporate community to also step up and be a part of this as well, because the corporate community is also going to benefit from home ownership, just like the city, just like the county will from a tax-based perspective. They're going to have a steady stream of employees that they know are committed to getting up and going to work every day, and are going to be committed to their job because they have a mortgage to pay and a family to raise in this new house that they just bought. So we've got to step up to the challenge, and we need to step up soon, because this housing shortage isn't going away anytime soon. And the price that you pay for lumber and for drywall and for nails and for screws is exactly the same as it is for an affordable housing product, as it is for a market rate product. So we've got to find some creative solutions, and we've got to find them and implement them soon. We have plenty of plans to work around on how we can solve this problem. But if we don't start working towards getting solutions to these problems, we're going to be having this same conference a year and a half from now.
Oh, let's hope not. So, Derek, that sounds like that's a perfect segue into what I was going to ask you all to do. That sounds like sort of closing comments from you. Jim, I really appreciate all the time that you've given us here in Cincinnati today. Do you have some final thoughts? And Commissioner Driehaus, I'm coming to you next, that you'd like to share before we go to questions that we've got in the chat? And then I've, of course, got some final thoughts too. So.
Well, first, thanks for having me. It's good to be back in Cincinnati, even though I'm sitting in my office in Chicago. But, I just think you've said it, I've said it again, and I think the secretary is that, and Derek mentioned it, the commissioner mentioned, we're at a historic moment, and we have a chance to do it right. I've said I've been in this business for 30 years, and quite honestly, I haven't seen HUD actually have a real housing production program in those 30 years. That's about to change. And I think you are, the Cincinnati and Hamilton County, you have such a great network of professionals, from housing counselors to realtors to bankers to CDCs, and for-profit developers that are in the right place and well situated to do this and do it right. I think that this historic investment can serve a lot of people, solve some of our problems. It's not going to solve them all, but it's going to start the ball rolling in the right direction. So I thank all of our partners. We've thrown a lot. Federal government has thrown a lot at communities, and they have responded. So we just got to roll up our sleeves and wait for the next tranche and get started, and let's build some units.
All right. Commissioner Driehaus, I'm going to ask from last kind of thoughts from you, and then I'm going to try and cover a couple of things in the chat.
Well, I say here, let's build some units. Because, what you've been hearing from all of us is that this is the way to build wealth in a community, in every community, right? And some of those that have been left behind in the past cannot be left behind this time with this intentional approach. And so as we build housing, which is the one bucket, we then in turn, and I agree with Derek when it comes to this workforce piece, and people have to be able to afford to go into those homes. We're also we've set aside quite a bit of money for workforce development, childcare, those kinds of things that get people back in the workforce with good paying jobs. And so that's about another 30 million of the bucket that we were talking about earlier. But it's all the same bowl of wax. And we need to, think through, how do you build wealth in a community, sustainable wealth for everybody in this community, and give everybody the opportunity to do that. And housing is a spectacular way to get to that goal. So, we'll do our best work. I agree that, we are well positioned right now. We've got some folks in the conversation, I think, that haven't really played a major part in the past. I think of, not to diss on anybody, but I think I've talked to bankers who are looking at this a little differently than they have in the past, and that's good news. And so we've got some untraditional partners, and I think that will help move the needle here as we think through how we're going to invest these dollars.
So as I have listened to all the sessions today, the thing that strikes me is that we know what the issues are. We can graph them, map them, chart them, and it's pretty horrific. But I think that we also know what to do about it. There is so much energy and so much talent and so much thought in the House right now that I feel really hopeful. What I do want to say, and we keep talking about the comprehensive nature of housing. People have asked me over and over again, what's the one thing we need to do? And there is not one thing. The answer to that question is there's 47 things. And I think the only way to get there is to make sure that all of the partners, education partners, job force partners, healthcare partners, are all connected to this housing issue and all paying attention and connected to one another and do their part. So I think one of the things I want to do today is challenge all of us in the room to go to the expo and look at all of the great documentation, all of the wonderful reports and statistics that have been put together over the last several years to describe the situation and find your role. Find the thing that you're going to do, and then figure out how to connect to everybody else and do that thing. And I think that what is also clear to me is that we need more resources attaching to this issue. And that means more money. And you're hearing the county talk about that. You're hearing HUD talk about that. It also means more human resources. I think one of the things that was such a barrier when all of the original rent subsidy came out was that we needed humans to connect the dollars to the people. And so I think we need more people connected to this work as well. So the capacity in all of our CDCs, the capacity in all of the organizations that we're all from really needs to be beefed up so that we are ready when it comes time to spend more money to produce more housing. And that sounds like my final remarks, and it is, except that I want to make sure that I'm respectful of folks' questions in the comments. There's been questions about zoning. We actually haven't talked that much about zoning today, which is always a surprise to me. I think there are ways to increase density in suburban and urban communities without blowing up neighborhoods. I think that every one of our commercial corridors wants more roofs in place so that we can support coffee shops and restaurants and breweries, and bringing more people to those places is what will do that. And I think there are absolutely ways that we can do that. I also think that maybe we haven't talked enough maybe today about homeowner supports for existing homeowners. And I can tell you that the county in particular is looking at setting aside funds to support existing homeowners who need to be making improvements to their properties so that they can stay in their housing. I hope Kristen Baker is still in the House, because I'm going to give a shout out to Housing Our Future right now. It establishes 4 big buckets: produce more housing, protect the existing homeowners and communities we have, preserve existing housing, Greg Johnson, CMHA, all of the existing legacy housing that we have, which is affordable, and work on the systems that create barriers, like zoning, like lending, like appraising. So again, I think we understand the problem and we've got a lot of the answers. It is now just about all of us stepping up and doing our thing and doing it in concert with each other. I think the other thing, maybe the last thing I'll say, I keep saying that, is that we all need to hold each other accountable, but that does not mean vilify each other. Sometimes we're bad at that. I think we are the team, and we need to make sure that we're connected to each other and that we're paying attention and that we're holding each other and ourselves accountable for outcomes, real honest to God outcomes, but that we do that in a way that's civil and doesn't denigrate each other or our objectives. So maybe we know who we are and we know what we're saying. I don't want to leave today without saying thank you to 1 million people. And I won't say thank you to 1 million people right this minute, but I will say thank you to a few. I want to say thank you in particular to our producers for today, Emma Shirey and Laura Castillo. I want to say thank you to my planning team. That's Kristen Baker from LIST, Greg Johnson from CMHA, Robert Killens from GCF, Ashley from the Urban League. The county has been very instrumental in getting us together. Also want to give a special thanks to James Buchanan. James really was sort of the motivator for all of us behind this. Thank you, James. Thank you to the Brueggemann Center, to Bill Magis at the Brueggemann Center, to Xavier University for giving us all the opportunity to be here and take this time. To all of the presenters, this is truly a distinguished group. We keep saying that, and it is absolutely true. And thank you to all the sponsors. We had lots of sponsors for this event today because they wanted to show that they care and are interested and are willing to step up on this topic. So thank you to all of them. Producers, Emma and Laura, is there anything else we need to do before we get everybody out 5 minutes before 4? All good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for everybody who's here. And please, let's all stay connected.
Thanks, Liz.